Today we're going to do a short review of two airbrushes. The first is the Iwata Eclipse HP CS, and the second is the Paasche Talon. Why did I pick these two airbrushes? Well, I picked the Iwata because it's generally considered the cream of the crop and the best in the industry. I picked the Talon for another reason. It comes with 3 nozzles and something called an air cap. And I'll explain what that is and why I'm interested in that in a little bit. We're going to do 3 different tests. A general spray pattern test with lines and dots and shading to see how they work. I'm going to do a little bit of painting of some miniatures to test how they work in modeling. And I'm going to do a coverage test. And that's where the air cap comes in. A airbrush sprays in a circular pattern. And what that does is leads to uneven coverage when you're spraying a whole surface, like when you're painting a car or a boat or a plane or a tank or a railroad car, anything with a large surface area. Because as you move across with that circle, the center gets more paint than the edges. So typically you'll keep spraying until you get the bare spots covered, and that leads to an excess buildup in the middle of the pattern. And what that does is obscure the detail, which is the last thing we want. An air cap transforms the spray pattern to more of a line. So as you spray across, you get more even coverage. That's why it's used in industrial applications like automotive refinishing, where they want to get a nice even coat with as minimum material as possible. So we're going to see how that works. Okay, this is
A couple of notes. First, as will become obvious, I'm not a great airbrush artist. Second, this really should be done with stencils, but I just wanted a quick and dirty comparison between the two brushes. The Iwata is capable of very fine lines. I got some spatter on the large dots, but that was due to being too close and applying too much paint. This thing's got a narrow cone. You really have to be quite a ways away from the paper to get a large pattern.
So start with circle.
And here that narrow cone angle bit me in the butt. I didn't get the shading as spread out as I liked. It was too narrow. I have to be further away from the paper.
Now, I am not by any means an airbrush artist, and it's really done with templates to get those nice hard edges, which I don't have. Coloring everything in black.
In addition to the lines, dots, and geometric shapes, I stole some graffiti off the internet. I thought I would try filling that in as a little extra exercise.
Let's try to outline this first. Fill. Oh, that would need a lot of touch-up. It's hard for me to find where it starts.
After the graffiti, I added a free-form additional sphere and then a cone next to it.
So that is the Iwata. Start with some lines. That was my fault, not the airbrush.
Even with comparable nozzles, the lines were less crisp with the Talon.
This is the medium tip.
Talon had a wider spray angle, which I think helped with the shading a little bit, although the shading didn't seem quite as smooth.
This is the 2 nozzle tip. So let's do this the way I did before. Now this airbrush. You can't color with it. That's the airbrush. Say is this airbrush requires trigger discipline. You have to let off the flow of the paint before you shut off the air, or if you don't, the next time you turn it on, just the air, you get a spray, which I don't like.
And that extra spray of paint hit me on every line outlining this graffiti.
I'm getting that every time you're doing stuff up close.
Technically, that should be the discipline you have, is to let off the paint before you let off the air, but none of the other airbrush I've used did that, so I'm going to count that as a strike against this one.
Cone. Yeah, this just doesn't have. Especially the fine. Now this is the number 2. Very deliberate. You have the air, flow, air, off.
These are the two side by side. I know they're not very good looking, but they at least give you a clue. I would have to say, using wise, the Iwata is a lot better than Paasche. Just the fact that if you aren't very disciplined with your trigger, air, paint off, air off, you'll get a spritz every time you turn the air on.
Next, I painted some 3D printed carpenter girls using only each airbrush. This level of detail was difficult, so I only wound up painting the flesh. And rather than watch me paint, let's just jump right to the results. This is the figure painted with the Paasche Talon. Even though it had the smallest nozzle, it was the most difficult one to paint. This is the figure painted with the Iwata. I got better separation between the colors, although it was very difficult painting something this small. The figure is only 40 millimeters tall overall. As a point of comparison for me, I also painted a third figure with my old DeVilbiss Dagger airbrush. This one came out looking the best, but that's probably because I've been using that airbrush for a while. It did have a problem with collecting stuff on the needle, which protrudes a lot more than the other two airbrushes and tends to collect garbage on it. In any event, painting a figure this small with only an airbrush is probably not a good idea. And now the Talon with the air cap. I went back and re-hit a couple of passes because I missed the 50% overlap. This thing with that 0.66 millimeter nozzle really chews through the paint.
And there we go.
Here's the Eclipse for comparison. As you can see, it doesn't cover nearly as quickly.
Out of paint.
Here is the final comparison. And this is a worst case. It's a transparent paint on clear acrylic backlit. But the Talon does have more even coverage, which is a lot more apparent in person than it is even in the video. And this is especially true if you only consider the 2.5 to 3 inch swath that it covers. I mean, that would be most of a model that you'd be painting. Final verdict? The Paasche Talon did have better coverage of large areas, and the Iwata had more uneven coverage of those same areas. But on the plus side for Iwata was everything else having to do with painting. Also, the Talon had some other issues. One, the trigger fell out every time I removed the needle and I had to go looking for it. Two, it was hard to thread in the nozzles. It felt like it was cross-threading, which of course if you actually did that would destroy the airbrush. Third is I had to take it apart and clean it to paint the line and sphere page. I have no idea why. Fourth, I really dislike the trigger discipline you need to use it. If you just let go of the trigger, the next time you turn on the air, you're going to get a spot of paint, which just completely turned me off to it. Even though the Talon does deliver on better prime and base coat coverage with that air cap, the Iwata outshines it everywhere else and is my winner. I hope this helps anyone considering these two airbrushes. I do lots of other hobby stuff, so check out some of my other videos if you found this interesting, and thanks for watching.